I'm Fanny Keefer, and this is Studio 4. Coming up, a dancing queen who knows how to tango and play more than scales on her piano. And craving solitude, alone on a remote Chilean island with a small feline instead of a curvaceous female. Bob Kull is a former logger and scuba diving instructor turned university student who picked a rather isolated project for his UBC thesis. Kull chose self-imposed exile on a desolate island. He spent a year and 2 weeks with a companion kitten on an uninhabited chunk of land about 2,700 miles south of Santiago, Chile. He was dropped off by the Chilean Navy and his sojourn began. He is back in Vancouver safe and sound with lots of great observations and a thesis that is not quite completed. It is my pleasure to welcome Bob Kull to Studio 4.
All right.
Welcome home.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Does it feel like home to you?
Yeah. Yeah, especially right now. I grew up in California, and especially right now, Canada feels a lot like home.
I bet it's the safest place you can be for now, perhaps.
Yeah, psychologically as well. It's just, yeah.
Would you do this again?
I'm not sure I'm capable of doing it again. It was hard. It took a lot out of me physically. I expect to continue doing a lot of solitary things. I spent a lot of time in solitude here in the city, but absolute extreme solitude in that kind of climate, I'm not sure. It'll depend on how deep the inner call pulls me.
What does it feel like, if you can even go there? What does it feel like to be totally alone with one epileptic kitten?
I guess I was never alone. That's what I went to explore, this sense of aloneness that we have, and the notion that our only possible connection is with another person. And I went to explore my sense of being connected and embedded in the universe. And so there were days when I felt alone, but it's a psychological barrier that I believe we put up around ourselves that cuts off the deeper interrelatedness and connectedness. So the times when my spirit and heart were open, then I was part of the sky and the sea and the dolphins out in front and the trees and the birds and the sea lions. So there was no sense of aloneness at all.
And the limpets.
And the limpets.
A limpet is like a little snake?
Yeah, it's a little conical snail that live clamped to the rocks among the mussels. And they're there. They're part of the life around. And I, over the months, would wander out along the rocks, and there's the mussels, and I'm pretty clear that mussels stay where they're put. But I got curious about these limpets. What are these guys up to? You know, this limpet right here, what's he doing?
Yes.
Is he here tomorrow? Does he move an inch? Does he move? What is he doing?
Right.
And this went on. This kind of curiosity started growing in me until I finally said, I think I'm going to do a study of these things. I'm going to be a scientist.
So I'm making it up.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I have training. One of my undergraduate degrees is in animal behavior biology. So I have training in biology. And I took scientific gear with me for just this. I took 2 bottles of nail polish, a bottle of red, a bottle of white. Yes.
You're not a transvestite or anything.
No. Well, that's a different story.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Okay. Why did you pick this particular island? How did you get there?
I started here in the UBC map library when I'd get really sick of my philosophical readings and psychology and all that stuff. I'd bail out and I'd do one of 2 things. I'd either start working on my lists, my logistical side of things, or I'd go to the map library and start dreaming with maps, where can I go? From past experience, I knew I wanted to be 150 kilometers or so from the nearest small town, because that's what I need psychologically to feel like I'm really not hanging on the outskirts of a town. So I had an area in mind. And I also was looking at BC because I wasn't clear that I was going to be able to get to Chile. I considered both because the climate and the land mass is very similar along the coast. But little by little, I came to really recognize that I wasn't going to find true solitude here in BC. There's lots of planes flying over and kayakers and fishermen and loggers. And if I really wanted a place, then I needed to go down there. And I'd been through there once on a ferry. There's a ferry route that goes up the coast. And I fell absolutely in love with it. And so I have all these rational reasons, excuse me, I got a cold, of why I picked the spot. But really, I just felt a deep call to go back. And so I had an area picked out on the map, and then talking with the National Parks guy, who knew the area, he said, if you go out to the west, you'll get fishermen. So if you really want to be alone, go near the mountainside. And so together we picked out a little bay. And this is where I'll go. But the Navy wouldn't take me there because it was so unknown, there's no depth soundings on their charts.
Really? This would be the Chilean Navy?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so they said,
I'm
we'll
not sure
drop you
we have
here.
a Canadian Navy. Yes, we do.
Yes,
Just
we do.
kidding.
But I don't know that they'd be so open, knock on their door. Could you take me out to the
Would you like to go to Chile?
Yeah, I was amazed at the Chilean Navy. They were just wonderful. Well, everybody in Chile was just incredible.
Do you speak Spanish?
Yeah, I'm fluent in Spanish. So anyway, they dropped me at one spot and started dropping me. And then the weather got so foul that we finished unloading all my gear on this little island. And I waited there for 12 days for the weather to clear to go look at the bay. And I made that trip and decided that it wasn't practical to take all my gear down in a small boat with the weather like that. So I ended up just serendipity where they put me.
Wow. I mean, I can barely pack the right stuff to get to New York City, so I can't, for 3 days. So I can't imagine trying to figure out what you're going to take, what food you're going to take, what gear you're going to take, what medical equipment you're going to take. How did you do that?
It's a long process, and I have years of doing retreats, and so I know some of the stuff that's consistent across any retreat. Although this one was much more complicated. Usually when I go for 3 months in Canada, I go with a piece of plastic, a canoe, and a fishing rod, essentially, and food. But this time, because the climate is so extreme, and I was going to do a whole year in the winter, I went much more high-tech. Part of the reason was, with the university and my family and friends, I agreed that I would have some kind of emergency communication, so I took a satellite phone that I could send emails with. Given that, a whole bunch of other stuff proliferated. I needed electricity generation, so solar panels, and a whole bunch of stuff around the technological side. And I also decided, since I was in this very wild area, and excuse me, that I'd take a boat with an outboard this time. And then a chainsaw for firewood, and just, and so the lists proliferate. And so apart from looking at the maps during the 3 years of the academic preparation side, when I get really sick of all this mind stuff, I just sit and make lists. So I didn't leave it for the last minute. Right. And then at the last minute, I had lists everywhere, and I just started putting them together. And it's a huge job to imagine everything you're going to need for the next year.
And how hungry you're going to be. How much rice do you take if you took rice? Or how many beans do you take? And what kind of dried food? And are you much of a gourmet? Did you worry about
I kept it pretty simple.
The ballot?
Yeah, I kept it very simple. And food's pretty straightforward. You just figure out, you measure a certain amount of rice and beans, and you cook it up. You say, okay, how many meals does this give me? And then you just start multiplying through. You figure a year plus 10%. And then you have to stick to it. So when I got there, the stuff that was hard to stick to were dried fruits and little bits of chocolate and things like that. And you just say, I can only have this much every day. And so one of the first things is when I moved in was to divide all my food into 4 piles. So each one's 3 months, then divide those into 3 piles. This is a month, that into 4 piles. This is what I get for the week.
Right.
And then you have to discipline yourself to stick to it.
And I guess there wasn't a wine cellar on this particular island. That wasn't an option.
I took 3 bottles I took a bottle of brandy, a bottle of Drambuie, and a bottle of good scotch, and it was kind of, in the evening I'd have just like a sip, a tiny sip.
And isn't it amazing? I've done quite a bit of camping and river rafting, and after a long, hard day, this much brandy tastes like the best of it all.
Yeah, it's quite
somehow
wonderful.
It's this much. Like when you're downtown in a bar, you think I maybe need a whole glass, but no, it's just a little bit.
But Drambuie is the best.
Is it?
If you can only have a taste, Drambuie is the most satisfying drink of anything I've found. You don't want to, have a bunch of it, but it's. And for a period, I gave up. Because there was a time when I realized that I was escaping into food. Because a big part of the solitary experience is to find an environment that there are very few possibilities for escape from psychological, spiritual difficulties, emotional difficulties, so that the energy and the attention is focused deeper and deeper inward as an exploratory path. And there are many ways to escape. Activity is one we do hugely in our culture. And even then I'd go, I got to fix this today. There's always something. And so no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to sit here for today and not do anything today, just sit. And food was an escape. And so for the last 3 months, I gave up coffee and sugar and chocolate and all the kind of things that were apart from just what I needed to survive.
Reading is an escape. How many books did you take?
I took about 100, didn't read anywhere near that many, and I gave those up for the last 3 months as well. I turned them all so the spines were against the wall. There was no place to hide them, so I made them so it was just white pages sticking out, and they weren't books anymore.
Was that because you were tempted to read? It took the temptation away?
Partly, but partly just to move away from that place, because I was working to explore what maybe lies below language. When we move out of the place we normally live, which is completely thought dominated, reading, thinking, speaking, what happens when we allow some space that we can sink down below that and experience the world on a different level?
Did you talk out loud? It's just you and the cat, right?
Right.
Did you talk out loud?
I assume so. I talk out loud to myself in the city, so I assume I did there. And I'd catch myself sometimes. I go, "You're talking to yourself again, Bob." "Yeah, I know, but it's okay."
Little conversation. Did you talk to the cat?
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, very intense relationship with the cat. Not always happy. There was a lot of hard times. Cat liked to cry a lot. Cat was epileptic and there was a lot of different kinds of energy going on inside of him. And so there were some tense times when I would be focused on meditation and Cat would be crying and I'd have to work with my own response to that. Also, Cat liked to hunt birds. And I couldn't fault him because I was fishing, but I didn't, especially if I was set up taking a photograph and I'd spend an hour slowly coming close to a bird, I'm all ready and here comes Cat. Ooh.
Did Cat have a name?
Cat.
Cat.
Yeah, there was only one.
That's true.
Right.
So I guess it wasn't between Whisper and Billy or anything.
No.
It's the cat's the cat.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Amazing animal, just an incredible animal. I learned a huge amount. And a big piece of it was coming to question why I would get so upset, especially around his crying. I would take it as a demand on me, a personal affront, an insult, a whole series of things. But when I heard seagulls crying, it wasn't the same. And there was this questioning, why is it that the cat's crying tightens me up, and when I hear seagulls crying, they're just part of the world. And I came to explore that, it's because I'm treating this creature as mine, as an extension of myself, as a possession.
It must have been a big moment, in a sense, because seagulls, yes, they're part of the landscape, the sky. Cat, mine, possession.
Right. It was a big moment, and to turn him loose, that we share the world. And the next step, and a much more difficult one, is to acknowledge myself as well, that I don't own myself. I'm not my possession. So we treat ourselves like I'm supposed to do this, I'm supposed to obey this piece of my mind, this consciousness, this little ego. And when moods would come up, things I didn't like about myself, it was a huge ongoing search and battle that I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to feel the anxiety. I don't want to feel the fear. I want to be blissed out. I want to be enlightened. I want all these notions that I have of how my life should be. And to have to over and over face that and slowly come to acknowledge, I don't own me either. I'm a part of the universe. And there's some interaction that this consciousness has with the being, the deep being. But it's not a matter of domination and control. And when my sense is that a huge part of our relationship with the world, the non-human world, with each other, is all about domination, power, and control. And we see when it's carried to extremes what's going on in the world today.
How did it change how you feel about other human beings, or have you gone there yet? The heart connection, the energy connection period with humans as opposed to cats.
Right. The thing that's really important is solitude it's not as though we're not connected to people anymore. So I was constantly in a matrix of human beings, even in solitude, that my mind came into existence. My consciousness is a social consciousness. And so even when I'm alone, the consciousness that's exploring that is a social consciousness, that this sense of isolation is illusory. So we're not only physically embedded in and part of the natural world, the biological world, but psychologically, emotionally, we're part of the matrix of humanity. And so, in some sense, coming down and exploring myself more deeply allows me, I feel, to make deeper connections with others. We're so caught up in that we're social beings, and we interpret that at this level, that we have this ability to communicate. But there's something much deeper. There's a deeper communication, a connection, that we are one thing. We are all alive together. We're all manifestations of life together.
Were you ever a social being? Even when you were a young man, were you social? Did you go to the prom?
Oh,
Did
yeah.
you meet other people? Did you need to
Yeah.
go bowling?
Oh yeah, I still have. I'm still a very social being. I spend a lot of time alone, but my relationships are very important to me. Patty, the woman that came to spend a month on the island, who lives in Texas, we have a profound relationship, deeper than any I've ever had with anyone else. Just incredibly deep, and it's very, very important to me.
Is she your lover? Is she your wife?
She's my spiritual lover. You know, we're not physical lovers, but we're very deep friends, and I don't like the word soulmate, but there's something that we share that's just incredibly deep.
How did you meet her? Where does she fit in the picture?
We met years and years ago, briefly at a spiritual center where I was living back east, and then we're out of contact for, I don't know, 12 years. It was just a very brief. It wasn't anything personal. It was just two people sort of meeting. And I don't know, it must have been 12 years later, this spiritual community has an email list, and they send out, I think what he did was he sent out everybody's address and connection, and she saw my name and wrote, and it just came an email out of the blue. And we started communicating and just got very deeply connected, and we've been hooked up for about 4 years now, and she was a huge part of this project. She's the one that came. I had no plans to do any video shooting, but she arrived when she went down. After I'd been on the island for a year, she spent some time in Punta Arenas and ran into a couple of South Africans that were doing a documentary for National Geographic. And what are you doing, and this and that? And she told them, and they said, well, you can't just have this as a PhD thesis that nobody will read. You got to do some video shooting. And she went, oh yeah, and ran off to the duty-free zone port. This was the night before the Navy was bringing her to the island. And they were closed, they had just closed, and she banged on the door until they opened up, and she bought a camera and 30 hours of film. And so it was really quite remarkable to have her arrive, and she didn't know whether I'd accept this or not, whether I'd be willing to film. But it was wonderful because it was a whole different angle on the Year of Solitude. It was seeing it from the outside, from the eye of the camera, rather than just living it from the inside, and it gave a whole new perspective.
Was there ever a time, Bob, when you thought, I'm losing my mind?
I kept hoping. I mean, one of the things I went for was to lose my mind.
You lost a few teeth.
Yeah, I have lost, and I'm actually getting a bridge made at UBC, but it's a slow process in the student center there. A big part of what I went to explore is what lies beyond this mind that I identify as who I am, this Bob Kull, this little self. And that was a huge amount of the frustration and darkness. It wasn't happening. This sense that I went for something, I went to get something, both academically and in my personal and spiritual quest, and it wasn't happening. And it just went on. There would be moments, and it went on for months and months and months. And finally, a large transformation came when I slowly started to accept that I wasn't going to get to be a certain way. And the very act of grasping after a certain frame of mind, state of mind, spiritual state, was the problem. It was a greed-based movement of the ego, and was just reinforcing this little self. And as I slowly started to surrender and relax and say, okay, what is going on? Never mind what isn't going on. What is going on? That I started to move into the flow of the world and accept the internal movements of emotions and spirit in the same way I accept the outside of the weather. You know, there's rainy days and there's wind and there's sun and all those things, and that happens inside too.
So you grew to love the rain, obviously, and you grew to love the cold, and you grew to love the elements, which you probably did a little bit anyway when you went. But how did it change for you? You know how we are, we say, oh, it's raining, darn.
It was fascinating. The wind was my strongest teacher. Solitude, the basket of solitude, the context is the powerful teacher. But within that, wind was really powerful. in that I at first experienced wind as an enemy, a manifestation of the world that was trying to get rid of me, trying to wipe me out. And it was just huge anxiety around it. And the wind did, I mean, it was problematic. Physically, it flipped my boat and drowned both of my outboard motors in salt water.
And you're not much of a mechanic, I hear tell.
Not great. I managed to keep the motors running for the day. The motor quit 2 days after my friend Patty got there. I kept it going for the whole time, and then finally the head gasket blew out completely. So there was this shift of slowly, from previous retreats, I know that what terrifies me, if I keep trying to hold it out, and again, you know, I watch what the United States is up to in its movement of the world of holding everything out and projecting all its own darknesses out. That's just, to my mind, a huge collective movement of the kinds of things I was experiencing, of sensing an evil presence out there trying to get me. And knowing from previous retreats that if I stayed in that mindset, I'd literally go insane. I would go crazy. And so forcing myself out into the wind, out into the rain, to the exposed point, and just sit there and allow what I was terrified of to come in, and to start recognizing my own demons that I was projecting out, my own darkness that I was projecting out onto the world, and exploring and allowing the world to come into me.
It gives new meaning to face your fears.
Yeah, it does. And it's not, often when we say face fears, we're trying to conquer them. We face them so we can conquer them. But there's another level of allowing our fears to be part of our world.
It's like martial arts.
Yeah.
In a sense.
Yeah. Yeah. It's working with and saying, okay, what part of me that I think I like is the balance of this fear that I don't like? And this part that I think I like, how is it when I'm outside of this little self? When I stop identifying with it, how does it look to the rest of the world? And it seems to me often the very parts of myself that I don't like, when I can incorporate those, it makes me much softer and more embracing and compassionate of the world. And it's that very rejecting that hardens us up. And again, I hate to keep going back to what the United States is up to right now. Not just the United States, but that mindset of reacting and projecting fear out and the hardness. And anybody that's not directly involved looks and goes, what are you doing? This is madness on both sides.
Hail the conquering hero.
Yeah.
Or don't hail the conquering hero. Stop conquering.
Right. Stop conquering. And also, it's not just the United States. It's a kind of mindset of anger and of violence that begets violence from both sides. And if you look at it, so I didn't know anything about 9/11 until 6 months later.
Of course, because you would have been in the middle of nowhere. You didn't know 9/11 had happened when you heard.
Right. My first response was, because Patty told me not only that it happened, my first response was, okay, you know, that's a tragedy. People died. It's always a tragedy when people die. But I was also aware from there that people are dying all over the world, every day, all the time. Children are dying constantly. Even in the United States, people are dying from poverty and from automobile accidents and from drugs. And so it's this, you know, kernelization of one incident and focusing so intently on that. And then the response and the reaction to that struck me as the real tragedy, the deeper tragedy, was the psychological and political response to that. Instead of questioning, any kind of internal questioning in the United States of what brought this about? Do we have a role in what brought this about? This instant and absolute projection. They are evil, we're good, we did nothing, we're innocent. And when you do that, you start building these higher and higher walls around yourself. And pretty soon no communication can get in and none can get out. And that's what we see happening. And that's the tragedy.
And you must shake your head and say, how do we create, we collectively, a Saddam Hussein? What goes on?
I think, you know, I can't go too far into politics because that's not, I look inside myself and I go, what do I do as an individual that feels like the same process is going on in a bigger scale? And in a big chunk, it's not accepting the world as it is. I have desires, strong desires, how I want the world to be. And often those desires are linked up with control. of wanting to control and dominate the world and manipulate pieces of the world to make it be. And we don't settle in and allow ourselves to experience the world as it is. And as this winds up, it can move into violence. When we really don't want some aspect of the world, we get violent. We'll kill it. We'll do it in. And in that process, it comes back at us. It's not just one side. It's a level of interaction. It's a kind of mind state that grows amongst all of us.
And it has nothing to do with survival. It doesn't. In the big picture, nothing, because it will keep happening.
Yes, absolutely. Violence generates violence.
Yeah.
And
Don't we know that? We're getting smarter.
Well, but knowing it intellectually and actually acting on it is a big difference.
Because it does, in the real world, it does have something to do with survival. If I kill you, I live.
But there's a psychological and a physical. So even though psychologically and emotionally, spiritually, I open myself to the wind, it doesn't mean that I'm going to go out in my little boat in the worst of storms. So, and it's a very interesting balance of dancing with that.
And with nobody to rescue you.
Right.
You can't call the Coast Guard, the Chilean Coast Guard, and say, hello, I'm in a little trouble here. My outboard has fallen into the sea, the very cold sea that you can't swim in because it's so cold.
Right.
Come and get me. I can't imagine it. It would terrify me. I know that. I don't have to go
At times
there.
it does. At times it does.
Bob Kull, our guest, he's writing a thesis for interdisciplinary studies. He's actually in the Department of Forestry.
Well,
or however that works.
Yeah, interdisciplinary studies, but I live in forestry.
Okay, we'll come back. Bob Kull is visiting Studio 4. He spent a year and 2 weeks on an isolated chunk of terra firma so he could explore the psychological, emotional, and spiritual transformations that happen when a human lives in solitude. He did it for a reason. Well, many reasons. One, a PhD in interdisciplinary studies from UBC, which is not completed. How long is it going to take, or do you have any idea?
Well, they claim they're going to kick me out September 2004, so it has to be done by then. I don't know, because I'm waiting for the thesis to write me, and it's an odd process. Just like the whole way through, I still don't know what my PhD is about. It's ongoing lived experience interactive, and it changes constantly, and so it's growing, and I'll really know what it's about when it's done. But there's something about exploring solitude, but at the same time reflecting back into that. That's my process. It's not for everybody. And that our true task, I believe, is to live our own lives fully in the here and now. It's not that I did something special, particularly. All our lives are special.
So you don't want to be a hero out of this and say, oh my gosh, that guy, he's a hero. You don't want to be in the cover of Time magazine or anything. That's not your goal.
I'm just a guy. This is just what is part of my life. But I think that anybody that has kids and is holding down a regular job and living fully, really living as a full human being, and more importantly, experiencing their lives fully. And not, what we do is we escape. We escape into the future, we escape into the past.
We escape into cocktails, we escape into
activity.
The golf course, whatever, which is some good, some not.
Oh yeah, but it's part of our lives. But to really, people say, what's the meaning of life? And it's, as far as I can tell, it's to live fully, to truly, deeply experience ourselves as being alive. And then everything else comes from that.
Well, you've had a few crashes in your day. You've had a motorcycle accident, lost part of your leg. Did you take another leg to the island?
I did have a spare, an old one, an old leg. I didn't need it, but I did take a spare, yeah.
How much of your leg is gone?
Below the knee.
Below the knee.
Yeah. So, and that made it tough. That's one of the main reasons I slipped and fell a couple times and really screwed up the rotator cuff muscles in both shoulders. That was real uncomfortable for months. A lot of pain and just couldn't sleep very well. And every time I'd do any hard physical work, cutting wood or fishing or dragging the boat up, I'd go, it was hard. That was a hard part of it. There was a lot of pain in this year.
Physical pain.
Physical, psychological, spiritual. There was just a lot of pain.
Did you take a pill of any sort that you could off yourself with if you needed to? Did you have a weapon? Do you know what I mean? If you got into just such huge pain, nobody's around, you can't contact anybody, you're lying on a rock with the limpets.
Right. No, I'm pretty stubborn. So, it would have been more, I did have a sat phone that I could call for emergency help, and I also checked in once a month. And there was a period when I used it, I didn't call, and so I didn't have voice contact, it was all email, but there was a period I was convinced I needed more supplies, and I was sending a whole series of emails to arrange that. And it never happened, and I found out it was another exploration of how something twigs our mind that would be nice to have, and it moves into an absolute necessity. I can't live without this. And then watch that whole process dissolve again and go, oh, look at that. That was just a mind bubble that came up. So I did have the possibility to call for rescue. I took some anti-anxiety pills. I took some antidepressant pills. I expected more depression problems with the weather. But it just didn't even cross my mind to use them.
Did you sleep well at night? Did you know night and day? Did you have a watch? Did you know how long you'd been there?
Yeah, I knew how long I'd been there, and I gave up using a calendar after a while, and I just marked on paper because every first of the month I had to send an email that I'm alive. I gave up using a watch fairly early on. And there were long periods that the only time reference I had was when it got light in the morning and when it got dark at night, because if it was cloudy and I couldn't see the sun and the nights there were no stars, there was a real dislocation of time sometimes. I spent many nights awake all night. I'd be meditating or sitting and thinking, and I'd go, what's that? Oh, this is the dawn. Oh, I see. And so there was a shift of my rhythms. That sometimes, if I was getting firewood, I'd have to organize my activities around the tides. And so a big part of this surrender to the natural world was that I'm not in control. I can only go out to get wood or go fishing when the tides and the wind and the weather permits me to. And so that was a huge shift of relaxing into.
Did you ever figure out what the cat thought about you? You ever put yourself in the cat's brain?
Yeah, the cat was in some ways a real channel, I think, into the wilderness as well, because cats are wonderful. They kind of bridge. Dogs are pretty human, but cats aren't. Cats can be very human, but they also have a real connection. They're a wild creature still, and so the cat was acted as a bridge in some ways to call me into his world.
Did you ever think if you had to, would you have eaten the cat?
No, never. That didn't cross my mind.
Would have been like...
The reason I took the cat was to test shellfish. I wasn't planning to take the cat, but the national park said, you need to take a cat if you want to eat shellfish. Feed the shellfish to the cat because there's a lot of red tide. If the cat dies, then don't eat the shellfish.
The cat was the canary in a sense.
Right, exactly.
Oh my.
Yeah, but
so did you do that? Didn't
no,
work?
I got to really quickly. I got it really close to the cat, and so instead of him testing shellfish for me, I was catching fish for him.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's fine. What kind of fish?
Mostly red snapper.
Yes.
Real deep fish. A lot of work to catch. Just physically a lot of hard work. They're down almost 100 meters a lot of times. So a lot of.
And did you add spice and all of that? And did you have a nice little kitchen in your house? Did you cook outdoors?
I cooked inside. I had a propane stove for cooking, wood burning for heat. The fishing, as much as anything, has just always been a really deep part of my relationship with the natural world. It brings me into a place of having to acknowledge that all of us, to live, have to kill. It's too easy to, in the city, and even when if we go with freeze-dry food, and not to own that biological part of ourselves, that I only get to live if I'm taking others' lives. And it may not be animals. We may choose to be vegetarians.
Right.
And also for me, the act of fishing is a really sacred act of being given this sustenance from the world. And it was there sometimes most profoundly that I really experienced that everything is sacred, the sense of the sacred, of life is truly sacred.
When you returned, how long did it take you to get used to noise? A little bit of noise and a lot of noise.
Well, I stayed in a small town in southern Chile for 2 months, Punta Arenas, or Puerto Natales, I'm sorry, to kind of adapt. I'm still not good with noise. When loud noises happen, I'm just not very good with it. I haven't been for a lot of years. I've tried to move into the space of accepting the noise of the city as energy, the same way as the wind was on the island. And I have friends that love sirens. They love blaring horns. And I go, okay, it's just my mindset that says this is awful.
You're not listening to a lot of rap.
No.
No, probably not. Heavy metal, not your thing.
And the rain is a good example. At first out there, it's like, oh, God, it's raining again. And slowly it became one of my most powerful meditations, is just to listen to the rain and allow it to settle me down. And I just recognized the other night, I live in a little trailer, and I was hearing the rain on the roof, and I just recognized within the last week that the rain was one of my most powerful teachers as well. And in the wind taught me about surrender. The rain taught me about becoming tender and opening my heart and allowing myself to feel softer.
Can people email you? Will you come to speak to groups? What's next?
No, the thesis is next, but a big part of this is not just doing an academic work, all from the beginning. This is about integrating my own lived experience and personal quest into academia, so that that division between personal and academic slowly dissolves. And so it's important to me to, through slides, I do a 2-hour slide presentation that through journal readings, and invite people not just to talk about my experience, but to actually invite people into that place of solitude to reflect back on their own lives, because this is what's really important, is not to fantasize about going to an island, but to live fully here and now in this moment. So please, if they email me or if they go to the UBC website and just type in solitude, they can find me.
Okay. Well, nice to meet you.
Pleasure.
We're talking to Linda Lee Thomas next. You were talking to her in the green room, and you said you watched the Limpets do the tango on the rocks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you're going to have a great time with her. She's wonderful.
Yes, she is.
She's a neat lady.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up.